broadcasting live from shop.org in Los Angeles, California. I'm speaking with Kelly Goetsch, Chief Product Officer of a company called commercetools. How are you today, Kelly?
Great, how are you?
Fantastic. So what does commercetools do?
We offer a big library of 300 individually consumable commerce APIs. So if you look at like AWS or Google Cloud or Azure, right, any of the big cloud vendors, you log in and you're confronted with a big list of services. And there are some services there for compute, some for storage, some for networking, but they also have some services for machine learning, for you name it, right? They've got a big list of these things. And as a customer, you can go in and you can buy those pieces one at a time, or you can buy all of them. And we do the same thing for e-commerce. We have APIs for shopping cart, for products, for pricing, for promotions. We also have all the business user tooling around that. And very similar to a public cloud, if you're consuming an image recognition API from Azure, you code your application around that API. They're continually publishing updates. You pay for it on a metered basis. We do the same thing, but with commerce functionality specifically.
Okay, so you've built APIs which specifically work for commerce. And does that also, when you say commerce, does that also include like omni-channel retail, physical retail as well?
Yeah, we have quite a few customers who use us in store. They use us at point of sale terminals. They use us at kiosks. Anywhere you can consume an API is now a retail touch point. So yes, we're used everywhere.
Would it be fair to call it serverless? Is that the future of software?
We're moving in that direction. So historically, if you were deploying an application, right, you'd have to buy the application from some vendor, right? Say Oracle, IBM, SAP, right? You contract with them, you buy the application, then you go out and buy some servers from somewhere. And then you put the servers in your data center, you have somebody install an operating system, right? And that server became something that you managed through its entire life cycle. And then we switched in about the mid-2000s to more of a virtual machine era. So there the concept is, all right, I'm going to have a huge pool of these servers, and now I'm going to abstract away what's running on those servers with the physical servers themselves. And now we're more in a container era. So whatever stuff you want to package up, you put it in a neat little container, and you deploy that. And serverless is the next logical conclusion of that. It's the next progression in that evolution, where now with serverless, you don't care about where it's deployed, how it's deployed, you don't care about scalability. All you say is, here's a snippet of code, right? And you paste it in your cloud vendor's console, or you upload a small artifact, and they then are entirely responsible for managing the entire life cycle of that, and you typically pay per millisecond that it's executing. So it's an entirely different model that almost completely eliminates all of the operations traditional, even with passes, right? It's a step beyond a traditional pass.
Okay. So it's not that there is no server anymore. It's just that the customer doesn't have to manage a server anymore.
Right.
Everything is done on somebody else's servers, and they're going to manage the scaling of it, the processing, all of those things for you, so you can focus basically on your functionality.
Correct. And there's a lot of people will say, isn't that basically a PaaS, right? And to that I'd say, if you can instantiate an entire copy of your application.
Just to what is a PaaS?
Platform as a service. So think of something like Google App Engine or Heroku, right? It's these stacks that think of it like a WordPress PaaS, right? So you don't have to go and install it. Somebody gives you a copy of WordPress that's up and running, and we have the same thing across the board. We have Google, we have all of them. AWS has Beanstalk, and the concept there is if you have a nice application that fits in that ecosystem, you deploy your artifact and they manage it for you. But the difference with serverless specifically is you're not, with the traditional PaaS, it's stateful, right? You're deploying an entire application. It usually takes a couple minutes, and then it's a long-lived artifact that you then have to auto-scale. Where with serverless, you're instead giving it, the artifact tends to be much smaller, and it instantiates a copy of the application for just a couple milliseconds. So imagine an HTTP request coming in, the serverless stack of choice will spin up a copy of your application, execute that one HTTP request typically, and then shut it down, and they'll pay you for the 30 milliseconds that it executed. Whereas a traditional PaaS, it's more helping with the setup. It helps deploy it, but it doesn't go away when it's done. It's still a stateful thing that exists for a long period of time. So it's how quickly can you spin it up, and once it's up, how long does it stay up?
And by stateful, what that means is that the server is actually keeping your application live for good, even though it's not being used, correct?
Correct. So you can run into a situation where, even with the best of auto-scaling, you're still dramatically over-provisioned. And that's what's nice about serverless as a concept is if you are doing something like click capture, right? So somebody comes to your website or a mobile app, you want to log that into a database. With a traditional PaaS, you're dealing with application instances, right? You're dealing with 30 cores, 40 cores, 50 cores, whatever it is. In here, all you do is you throw them this little snippet of JavaScript or whatever your language is and say, when this event happens, and this event happens to be a click, do this action, and this action might be to go log it in a database. With serverless, you don't have to deal with concurrency. It will spin up a copy of your application for the exact event. It's a one-to-one mapping. So if you have 5 requests per second, it'll spin up 5 copies per second, and it'll bill you for the number of milliseconds it executes. If you have 100 million, it will also spin it up 100 million of them in a second and shut it down again. But that's not for you as a consumer to worry about. It's simply a problem for the vendor to deal with. So it's completely different, and it's really revolutionizing a lot of use cases out there in cloud computing.
Okay, so one of the challenges that I've heard with serverless or in general cloud applications is the fact that when you are making so many calls, there could be a delay between all these calls applying back to, getting back the information. How do you handle that? How do you make sure that the information is really getting back when a call is made?
With
really
cloud
quickly?
or serverless more specifically?
I think probably more cloud and maybe even more applicable to APIs in general.
Yeah. I think a lot of that's architecture. What a lot of folks have done is grafted their legacy on-premises deployment architecture to a public cloud. And latencies are great within clouds. But as soon as you start architecting for higher availability, you're now crossing boundaries, right? So you might have your application tier in Dallas, and you might have your database in Chicago, and now you've got latency, right? And it's not just one data center where everything is deployed to that one stack, and there's no latency whatsoever. Now we're saying, well, let's have 5 copies of your front end, and we'll have 3 copies of your back end, and we'll map them together. And when you take a traditional architecture that has no tolerance for latency whatsoever, and you try to geographically distribute your front end from your back end or anything, that's when you run into problems. But if you do cloud native architecture from the very beginning, so if you look at like the 12-factor application development methodology that's very popular these days, if you follow that, cloud is absolutely faster than anything you're used to, and especially if you use some of these newer technologies like Kubernetes for container orchestration, those guarantee locality of data. So whenever you're making a request out, you're doing it within the same physical machine always 100% of the time. Okay,
so I think that is a key word right there, is cloud native architecture.
Yes.
There is a difference, major difference, between an application that was not designed for cloud and is now being ported to work on the cloud than an application that was designed for the cloud. This is something that most, non-technical people don't understand. They just think that this application is now cloud-enabled, and boom, it's just as good.
It's not. It's a lift and shift. And a lot of these legacy applications, especially in the commerce space, it might take 1,000 individual calls back to a database. to render a page. I mean, think about that, 1,000 separate calls. It's made some database vendors out there very wealthy over the years, I'll tell you that. But with cloud native, it's an entirely different paradigm. You're consuming APIs, and typically you're consuming a handful of them. And if you use the latest technology, if you use something like GraphQL, which came out of Facebook, you might only issue one query. That's it, exactly one query to render the most complex pages out there. So you can't just take something that makes 1,000 database calls for a single page view, throw that in a cloud, and then add 3 milliseconds of latency between your app tier and your database tier. It just doesn't work.
Right.
And people, yeah, that's the problem. People think that, all right, well, it's an AWS. Technically, AWS is hosting it, but in no way does the architecture support the style of development.
It's definitely a step in the right direction, but I mean, just for comparison, you're not really comparing apple to apple.
Right.
So when you're doing that. So the history of where serverless came about, really, what was it? Where did it start?
People have wanted to do it for a while, and in 2006 there was actually a startup that did it, but they couldn't make it work from a financial standpoint. They kind of predated public cloud, right? AWS really started that in 2007 when they launched, but they were a little bit early. And where it really started to get mainstream adoption was when AWS launched Lambda in 2014. And Lambda is, I think, by far the most default implementation of this. And the use case they actually had in mind, they built it internally for storage, because people were dumping data into S3 buckets, into storage within AWS, and they wanted to do something once that happened. And examples included, I put a file there, now let's encrypt it, right? Or I loaded a 10 megabyte high resolution copy of a photo. Well, whenever that happens, I want to trigger some code that then resizes that image and saves 5 lower resolution copies. And that's actually how it started. When they launched in 2014, that image resizing was the default. And what they've done is Lambda enabled all of their services. So now all of the services across the AWS ecosystem emit these events, right? Millions and millions and millions of events, often per second. And anytime something is done, whether it instantiates a new container or whether a new customer signs on or anything that happens, an event is emitted. And then using Lambda, you can subscribe to those events and do something based on that action. So it allows you to get really, the cloud is now the operating system, basically. It's not just a place where you host your custom application. Now when you have these events floating around, you can then consume them and really build complicated, interesting, innovative applications. And I should say it's not just AWS. Google has Cloud Functions. Azure does as well. So they're certainly copying them, and they've done their own implementations internally over the years and are now exposing them.
Right. So, I mean, would it be fair to say that there are like a handful of companies, maybe 3, that really are owning that space right now, or who else is in that space as far as like providing this kind of serverless capabilities?
Iron.io does a little bit as well. The problem is typically everybody uses one of the 3 major cloud vendors. And it's really hard to graft on a third-party serverless stack when you're already locked into their ecosystem. So if you're an Azure customer, it's really dead simple to go hook up Azure Cloud Functions, which is their Lambda equivalent, to all of the events that they produce internally, right? The 2 are meant to work together. They were developed in collaboration. So to put in Iron.io or some third party in the middle adds no value, and it just adds a lot of complexity. So that's why you see these natural monopolies forming, because each one of these clouds is its own distinct ecosystem.
Right.
And that's why you haven't seen things like OpenStack, for example, succeed, because the cloud vendors themselves do it better because of all that integration.
Right. I mean, so as far as from a point of view of a customer, a retailer, how do you make a decision which one to go? Is it based on what do I have in place right now? Am I a Microsoft shop or not? And that's how I make a decision?
Yeah, I mean, we just switched clouds internally at commercetools. We are 100% cloud-based, public cloud-based, and we were on Rackspace. And with Rackspace, their investment in their cloud business declining quite substantially, we thought it was time to switch. And we thought about AWS. It's a very good solution, but a lot of our customers have competitive problems with them, right? They don't want to feed the very thing that is eating them.
Okay.
Which is fair, and if you look at their financial statements, it's actually clear that public cloud is subsidizing a lot of the retail business. So I get that. And then it's a matter of Microsoft with Azure or Google Cloud. Microsoft is very good from a sales support standpoint. They are used to selling to enterprises, right? Very used to it, very clear. They have good support, good everything. Google is more meant for independent software vendors like us, ISVs. It's very well documented. Everything is automated. It's a really robust, reliable stack. The issue is it's not. If you need a little hand-holding or support, or this is your first cloud, it's probably not the right stack. So we actually ended up going with Google. We have got a great ops team. It worked really well for us, but I would say traditional enterprise probably should do Azure, or if there are not competitive reasons, AWS.
Okay.
And this will all change, of course. 6 months from now, this could be a totally different story, given all the investment here. But that was our experience when we were shopping for a new cloud vendor.
Right. So from a vendor point of view, an ISV point of view, is there a risk in tying yourself too closely to one of the public cloud vendors?
Not for us. We deploy on top of Kubernetes for container orchestration. So Kubernetes is it's actually emerging as the default now, where if you've got a bunch of containers, Kubernetes will deploy them on physical machines for you. So it's responsible then for networking and doing all the labor of taking containers, running them, starting them, managing the life cycle. And we deploy on that. That is basically a PaaS. It's a PaaS for containers. And because we run on that, we can run anywhere that supports Kubernetes. And now all of the cloud vendors do have a managed Kubernetes offering. Or, of course, you can always just get Kubernetes running yourself. I mean, that's what we did at Rackspace for a number of years. It seemed to work well. But no, we're not worried about lock-in. But again, I think we're uniquely positioned in that most of our stack is our own IP. If you were building a new application from scratch, a new big ecosystem, then it becomes really tempting to start wiring in proprietary services into your application.
Right.
And, truth be told, in today's era, it's all about speed, right? You're not writing something for the next 20 years, you're writing it for the next 18 months. So
that's why I asked that question, is that things are, moving and evolving so quickly. I feel there is a risk in tying yourself too deeply into any one. From a customer point of view, you need to have at least a couple of options. So if a customer comes to you and says, I want to host my data on AWS, are you able to offer that to them now?
No. We could. There's nothing technically that stops us from doing it.
Right.
And we've discussed it with a handful of customers, but it tends to be one of those things that they just, once they evaluate it and they actually look at it, they tend not to do it. It's one of those vestiges of the past, right? I want to control it. It's safer under my control.
Right.
And I fundamentally disagree with that premise. We as an ISV and others out there hire really smart people to do nothing but look after your data.
Right.
And a typical retailer, while they might be good at merchandising and some other things, really advanced cloud security and things like that is not something that they're equipped to deal with. And that's why you see multi-tenant winning out everywhere. Right, if you look at Salesforce, that's multi-tenant. If you look at the public clouds themselves, they are all 100% multi-tenant. Right? Down to the core, they're multi-tenant, and we really believe multi-tenant is winning out. That being said, again, if there are enough zeros on a check, we'll probably do it.
Right.
But
I'm just thinking, like, if Google tomorrow buys a competitor and becomes a competitor, a bigger. They already have shopping.
Yeah.
But if they become a bigger competitor to retailers, and somebody says, "Oh, okay, I don't want to go with Google." How do you manage that? So, and is that going to be like a major integration project for them, or is that something that again, with the zero, you can handle for them?
For us, we use Terraform to deploy our environments, and that even includes Kubernetes setup if need be. So it's not a huge deal. Where it becomes a big deal for us is in versioning. Because as a software vendor, we have exactly one version of our software running at any given time. But now if you start fragmenting it and you have customer over here and they only want updates once every quarter, customer over here, they want the daily updates. Now everything internally for us becomes what version are they on, right? And the developers have to have multiple versions of code running. And again, we can do it. It's not an insurmountable thing for us, but we found it works better for everyone in the ecosystem if everybody just consumes the same version. Yeah. It's like if you're integrating with Stripe, right? They've got an API. Everybody codes to that API. They build to that one API. And you don't see customers saying, well, I want my own dedicated copy of Stripe running behind the scenes. It doesn't make sense anymore. Right.
What are some specific capabilities that a commerce API needs to have that other types of APIs probably don't have, like scale or speed, or is there like security or...
Yeah, all of those things. So scaling, for example, our customers, when they sign up for our platform, we give them an API key and we give them a URL, right? And it's one URL for everyone, right? It's api.commercetools.com. Really, really simple, one single URL only. And that's the beauty of cloud and this new style of development, which is the customers don't and shouldn't care what is behind that API. Right? I mean, we could have a 30-year-old application written in C++, right? That's connected to a mainframe, right? Like it could be the most obscene setup in the world.
Right.
And as long as we as a vendor are publishing and exposing our APIs and hitting our SLA targets, as a consumer, in theory, at least, you shouldn't care.
Right.
Now, it happens to be we have a very modern stack. It's Scala, Kubernetes, containerized, MongoDB. It's a very, very modern stack, and we're good. But, that's the style of this new world is who cares what is behind the API? As long as you are contracting and they're meeting their obligations. An API is very similar to a legal contract, for example. Right? If you're a commodities trader and you buy an option to get 10,000 pounds of corn delivered, you don't care if they deliver it on mules or in a truck, right? Like, you bought it, and as long as it shows up when it's supposed to show up,
right? You mentioned contract. It reminded me of the blockchain, which is pretty interesting, and it's actually a lot of even how the software is working is going onto the blockchain. Is that something that you guys have heard about, or talked about?
We actually use Kafka a lot. And Kafka and blockchain are actually built on a lot of the same underlying technology. It's a distributed transaction log. So conceptually, it's quite similar. And it's good to see that underlying technology is really branching out and people are finding interesting use cases for it. We have had customers talk to us about product transparency, and it's something we're thinking about doing. But at this point, our customers and suppliers aren't yet asking for it. We are making big investments in machine learning, and there are a lot more shorter-term things, right? We do image recognition. We do product categorization based on images and metadata. We do product data quality analysis. There's a whole bunch we do, but in terms of using blockchain directly, we've thought about it, but we can't think of a good use case that people would actually use today, or even in the next year.
Okay.
But I think 5 years out, certainly. I just don't see the use case quite yet for exactly what we're doing. Yeah,
I think it's pretty limited right now as far as usage, but there's promising signals.
Yeah.
And on how things are working out. So now, going to the concept of APIs. For anybody that doesn't know exactly what an API is, can you give me like a really quick intro to what an API is and why is it important to retailers?
An API is fundamentally a contract. So as a provider, right, we publish a catalog of APIs, and these APIs do different things. Some of them are to retrieve data, right? And we have an order API, right? Go get me this order.
An API is a software, like
Application
it's an
programming
application
interface.
program, right?
Right.
And it's basically code that requests information or sends information
Right.
to the other end of the line, I guess.
So as a producer, we publish a big catalog of these things, and some of them are for exposing data. Some of them are for doing things like transacting in some way, and a transaction might be add an item to a shopping cart. But fundamentally, it's a promise that as a vendor, we will do a certain action or retrieve certain data based on the calls. So you'll have an API for promotion evaluation, right? What promotions does this product qualify for? And you have a very fixed set of inputs, right? And we define those, right? You have to give us the product ID to perform this action, right? To retrieve this product, we need the product ID. And then there's a set of output that we promise as well. And we as a vendor will say, here's the format of the product that we will give back to you. Here's the uptime of our API, and we'll guarantee it to 99.999%, whatever the SLA is, right? Service level agreement. And we'll give you these certain response codes. So if you have a product that does not work, that does not there, we'll give you a 404 response, right? So think of it very similar to a legal contract, right? It's two parties coming together. One party puts out in writing what they promise to provide. The other party can then execute and consume that. The difference with APIs is APIs are now everywhere. I mean, every single thing we do is all API based in this world, both physical and digital. And we're taking that to the next level with commerce.
Okay, so on the software side, basically somebody at the retailer's own technical team is programming their system to speak with your API. You give them the information, and that API basically sends the information. So let's say, for example, if somebody signs up with commercetools, what are the APIs that they would start with?
They'd probably start with the product APIs.
And what does the product API do?
It exposes product details, right? So we have a really nice visual editor for managing and merchandising products. Customer will give us a load of their data. They'll go in and enrich the products there, and then we'll expose those APIs out to the world. And then their front ends, right, be it a website or a mobile app, whatever it is, will then consume that data and build a compelling experience based on that.
So the customer has the website, and they're practically putting all their product information on commercetools.
Correct.
And they're accessing those using the API call.
Right. And as an industry, we've done this forever. So ratings and reviews, for example, nobody does ratings and reviews on their own. Nobody does payments on their own. Nobody does, everybody's now adopting a shared inventory system between physical and digital. So we've done this forever, where at the front end, you're calling back to an API that is not your big commerce application. It might be power reviews. It might be an API for payments, for taxes. Right. And what we're saying is, why don't we extend that? Right. So the approach longer term, and how I see most retailers working out, is they'll end up with a big catalog of APIs. So rather than there being one big application with a web front end, instead retailers will start, and many already have, build out APIs that each do one thing and one thing well, right? Right. So they'll build out an API for promotions, one for inventory, one for pricing. And you might end up with 200 of these if you're a retailer. And some of those might be from a vendor like us, but some of them might be from a third-party SI. Some of them might be built in-house. And it's a mixture of these things. And imagine if you could go to a creative agency and say, hey, there's this new gizmo, right? Whatever this new gizmo is, right? And it now supports a shopping application of some sort, right? It now supports an interface for shopping. And you can go to them and say, here are my 200 APIs. They're perfectly documented. Go build me an app that does this and hit these APIs. And at that point, the creative agency does not have to build a new back end. They're simply consuming functionality exposed through APIs. Right. And which that's makes it a lot faster.
Projects go a lot faster. You could build
an application in a week right? I mean, it becomes a very trivial exercise to spin up a new user interface if you have everything as APIs.
Right.
And many retailers are doing full out omni-channel microservices. So microservices is the implementation behind the API. And what that means is instead of having these big horizontal teams, right, where you have a big ops team, you have a big development team, you have a big UI team,
right?
There are these big organizational boundaries. Microservices says, let's carve out a small team, 7 people, right? 7 people plus or minus 2 is the default, but by no means the rule.
Right.
And you say you 7, right? And there might be a couple ops people, a couple developers, a couple front end. You go out and build pricing as a service for the entire enterprise. Right? You 7 over here, you go do
and you
inventory.
Own it. You maintain it.
You own the entire stack. You maintain it. You expose functionality through an API. And that will then replace a lot of the old back office software that you use today. Because many retailers today have 20, 30, 40-year-old, they'll have an ERP system, a CRM, a warehouse management system, an order management system. They'll have all these big back-end systems that are basically duct taped together.
Right.
And what we see a lot of retailers doing, like Walmart, Target, Tesco, a lot of the really big guys out there are building individual microservices that serves as a system of record for the entire company. So within these big enterprises, there is exactly one API that you would ever conceive of calling for inventory. And whether you're on a mobile app somewhere in China or whether you're in Bentonville, Arkansas, and you're building an administration app and you want to look up inventory, there's exactly one way to do it. And there's no big back-end system, right? You're not going to an OMS or a WMS or ERP. You're simply calling that one API that does that one thing and that one thing well.
So technology can make or break retailers right now.
It is breaking them, I would argue.
It is breaking most of them.
It is breaking most of them.
So the question is, how does a retailer actually start to turn the ship? They can't just do a big bang and throw everything away, but they really need to. I mean, I'm not just like saying this. They really need to change the way they use software. Software is a product for them right now. It's not just something on the side,
Right.
So how do they start turning the ship?
I think first you need a real change agent, right? You need a CDO or somebody of that sort, somebody who can go in and really disrupt things. Because without that change agent, the organization tends to be quite entrenched and people don't have an incentive to change. And people want their 20% bonus every year. And the way they do that is by not blowing up their teams and doing a full reorg and upsetting a lot of people. Right? People are generally speaking happy, stable, and they'll stay in those jobs for years. And that's nothing against them. They're doing exactly what they're incentivized to do.
Right.
But I really think you need somebody strong to come in from the outside, shake things up. And then I think what you need to do is continue to build out small vertical teams that do exactly one thing and one thing well. And we saw this a few years ago with inventory. Because nothing upsets a customer more than going onto a website saying, all right, well, they have 5 of the wrenches I need, right? Home Depot has 5 wrenches that I need, right? They have 5 of them in this aisle in the store. And you go to that store and there's not one of them there, right? And you've wasted a half-hour trip now.
Right.
So people have been really upset about that. Same with pricing. You see a lot of that as well. And many retailers have already carved inventory and pricing out as separate vertical teams that expose their APIs out to the world. So that's a great start.
Right.
And what we advocate for is to continue that trend and expose more and more functionality as APIs. Of course, you have to go headless in your application tier. We really highly recommend that. We also really highly recommend using a digital experience platform for all of the UI work. Historically, IT has also owned the pane of glass with the customer. So anytime a marketing image needs to be changed, somebody in marketing has to ticket IT. And there's a 6-week turnaround time on that usually, which drives everybody crazy. And now with these newer products like Adobe Experience Manager, for example, marketing can control the complete user experience top to bottom. And then they call into the commerce platform to retrieve products and inventory and pricing. Right? They're calling into us to retrieve that data. And then customers themselves, our customers and retailers more generally, they need to look at what makes sense for them as a business to invest in. And just like many retailers have shifted to cloud, and they say, all right, if we have a team of 50 people building out data centers and installing operating systems every day, that doesn't make financial sense. It's cheaper for us to outsource that because we are not differentiating on that. Right, it's simply a tax that we have to pay. It's something we have historically had to do, and we continue to do it because we don't want to make any changes. And many retailers have shifted towards cloud, which of course abstracts all that away. And we would argue the same thing. As you move towards more of an API orientation, look at your catalog of APIs and define what those 200 APIs are up front. Right, and maybe it's 50 for you, maybe it's 500. Right, there's a huge variation there. And do an inventory and say, all right, this collection of APIs are things that are boring and necessary and not differentiated. And I would argue product catalog is in that category, right? The UIs to build for administration, the publishing process, it is absolutely necessary, but it's incredibly boring, and you don't get any value from doing it. Right, you get value from the data you put in, but there's no value in building a screen to allow a merchandiser to change a description of a product. Right, that's too far out. So why not outsource that? Right, and vendors like us will come in and happily do that. But if you have something that maybe you've built a very customized promotion engine, right, that's something you should probably build in-house. Right, if you're doing really advanced promotion evaluation and stacking rules and logic,
you should decide what is your secret sauce, basically. Right. And try to control that as much as you can.
And it's the same with the public clouds, right? People use them by and large for the commoditized things, for storage, for network, for compute. But they also rely on them for speech recognition, image recognition. There's a lot of cool stuff that they're doing that they, as a retailer, simply cannot do on their own. It's not that it doesn't make sense. They clearly should be consuming those services. But it's much better to pay $5 for 10 million API calls than it is to go build a team and actually build out the functionality on your own.
Right.
So think of it as commoditized things that are too boring to build, in which case buy them from somebody like us. There's a big middle ground of things that probably should be built. And then there's the top case, which is more the innovation. I'm going to consume something off the shelf from a vendor like commercetools or a public cloud that I wouldn't otherwise be able to build on my own.
Right. So on the things that, for example, retailers can do right now that they own, the type of technology that they can build, would it be like, we've talked about the APIs, the backend services, the boring stuff that really they should not spend their energy on. What are the exciting things that they should be spending their energy on that they can build themselves? Is it like AI, AR, things like that, or?
I think a lot of it is the digital experience platform space. I really think it's an intersection of that. So allowing merchandisers to go in and build compelling brand experiences, right? And I'm not talking about just a product grid where you can just go look at the products and That's a very different. That's a very commoditized experience. What I'm talking about is the overall experience, right? How the site looks, how it feels, connecting people to engaging brands, content, getting to them with emotional stories about how their products are used, appealing to their sense of values. I'm actually doing a tech talk on this at 3 o'clock later today on exactly how you differentiate. But I think that's more where you have to focus today. And then consuming the commerce functionality through one of those platforms as a set of APIs. So marketing controls that pane of glass, and then they consume the functionality from IT. So the more you can get your back-end IT systems in place so that they're exposing through APIs, then your marketing team can go wild with the digital experience and then start to integrate that digital experience with the other marketing technology out there, right? So things like social media campaigns, right?
Right. Basically own the experience and the relationship with the customer.
That's marketing what they should do that.
Right. That's what the retailers should focus on. And the question is how? How do they do that? So that's where the big secret is everybody tells the retailers experience is the holy grail, and create experiences that wow the customers. But very few people come out and say, okay, this is how you do it, and this is how you do it cheaply.
Right. So I'll tell you what Jeff Bezos did in 2003. He sent a memo to all of Amazon. It wasn't even a memo. It read more like an edict. And the edict was basically said, and it was just 6 line items. Henceforth, every new service developed must be exposed through an API. The technology behind it doesn't matter. There will be no form of inter-process communication. So the only way you can communicate with something else is through its APIs. No team can be larger than can be fed by 2 pizzas, right? So he issued a broad corporate edict. And the old joke was, and if you don't do this, you'll be fired. I don't know if he actually said that, but...
Make it simple. Make it very simple.
But I think that was really revolutionary thinking back in 2003. And it's allowed Amazon, every day Amazon comes out with a whole new product. And it's because they have this API first mentality. So I think you really need a change agent in place. Somebody who can say, henceforth, every single piece of functionality that we ever do will be exposed as an API. Anybody can call the API, right? And really start working on that. And then implement an API gateway. That's very important. So you now are building a catalog of these APIs. Then start to verticalize the teams. So now you have, instead of these big horizontal teams where to get one team to do something, you have to ticket them, switch to a vertical orientation, right? Where you have 5 people and they're just focused on promotions, and that's all they do. And they're empowered to deploy to production whenever they want. So if you do all of those things together collectively, and you put marketing firmly in charge, APIs on the tech side, you have that change agent, I think most retailers can do it, and I've seen a lot of them succeed in making that transformation.
Yeah. I think definitely there's a lot of retailers that are making really the right moves. The question is it fast enough?
It's not even is it fast enough, does their business model work in today's era? And that's the question I have, is if you're selling other people's stuff and you're not adding value to the customer, and there are huge swaths of American retail that do this today, right? It's all the mid-sized retailers, the general merchandise retailers, a lot of the brands that sell clothes that all look alike. They're not adding enough value. There's no value.
It's just a curation. I guess maybe if they do curate a set of items into one area, that's the value that they provide. So.
Right. And there are largely 2 types of purchases, right? So there's the non-discretionary stuff, right? I need to order some paper towels, right? I need to order some batteries, right? The remote control for the TV is dead, right? Order some batteries, and you go and order some batteries. Right. And if you're in that business, you're gone. Right, and there are a lot of retailers out there that'll sell you a 4-pack of batteries for $8 and then try to charge $5 for shipping those batteries. And that business model is beyond dead, right? And I've personally just taken the view that Amazon owns non-discretionary spending. But where there's a lot of room in the market
in
still.
In the U.S.
Yeah, in the U.S. But globally everywhere.
And globally also, yeah.
They're dominating as well. But it's where it's the discretionary spending where there's an opportunity. So if you're buying a high-end watch, or you want to buy a new pair of shoes, or you're buying something that reflects you and your personality, your values, maybe you're shopping for entertainment and you really want to buy a cool new necklace, those are the types of purchases that will not be dominated by Amazon, at least in the short term. And if you can build a compelling brand experience, right? Maybe you're selling luxury watches and you have pictures of people, wearing watches while they're yachting or something. I don't know, I'm just making that up.
Right.
That's how you connect to your customers and really break out of that commoditization trap that Amazon has put everybody in. It
is definitely connecting to the right customers. And I guess the beauty of the business is that everybody, there are billions of people and they all have different likes. So if you do something that is different and is unique, you will find an audience. It's just how do you connect with them? and how do you stay in touch with them with the current software? So that's the main theme of what I'm trying to say is all of the merchandising, product curation, branding, all of that one side, and then how do you actually handle the technology of providing what the customer wants in the format that they want to consume it from right now. Yeah. Mobile, watch, TV, whatever, web. So that's the other. And
APIs are the key to all of that.
APIs are the key.
Because from any device, 100 years from now, right? Assuming we're all still here.
You might be. Not
whatever device will be able to consume a REST endpoint, right? It will be able to consume a REST API, 100% guaranteed, because HTTP is the language of the internet, and it's just APIs. I mean, it just makes perfect sense. So whatever device it is, that's the way you future-proof yourself, is by offering your functionality internally as APIs, and then anybody can consume those APIs from anywhere, any device. And if you look at the legacy commerce platforms, they were all built for when the web was the only touch point, right? The two are very intertwined. The web, the HTML, JSP, ASP, all that technology in the front end was very coupled to the back end. And we're far beyond that at this point, right? And now if you've got this big catalog of APIs, you can say, all right, who cares now what's on the front end? Go let the marketing people figure that out. Right? As an IT team, all we care about is that our APIs do what they say they do, and we're meeting all the SLAs, and we're continuing to innovate by publishing new functionality.
So let me ask you a tough question.
Oh.
And it's probably more tough on myself than you. Where does, technology usage, and if you look at the boardrooms and the executives of most large retailers these days, you can see an age difference. And I'm saying that easy because I'm not young myself, so.
Young at heart.
Yeah. But where does age come into play in really getting what is happening to retail and what needs to change? Do you see that the younger companies with the younger leadership, they actually get this faster than other people that still are just trying to resist understanding what technology is doing to retail?
I don't think it's an age thing. I think it's a mindset thing, because I've seen plenty of young people get into this trap of, I've got a wife and kids, I've got a nice 9 to 5, I like my 3 weeks of vacation every year, I want my 20% annual bonus, and they are not incentivized to change. Okay. Right? And some people have it in them naturally, right? But a lot of folks out there, the job is a job. Right. And that's nothing against them, but it's a lifestyle for them.
Right.
And those folks are not incentivized to change. And again, it's not an age thing, but it tends to be that, when you just get more comfortable in your career and you do what you've been doing historically.
Right.
But again, I've seen
younger,
older,
I'm glad to hear that
same
point
thing.
of view, because I've seen young and old on both sides.
Yeah.
So this is
totally
good.
a mentality.
Yeah,
it really is a mentality.
Mindset, I think, is a good way of putting it. And the incentives come from the leadership. They come from the corporation. They don't come from the people. At least in most companies.
And what else is great about older folks is they've seen the technology trends.
Right.
And they're like, oh, yeah, this looked like, 1994, right? We're in the same, having lived through these.
Things are done that before.
Yeah, right. A lot of these things are conceptually very similar to what we've done in the past. New technology, of course, but there's a lot of wisdom that can be gained by having lived through a number of these cycles that, people like me, I'm in probably my second technology cycle, but if you've lived through 5 of them, that's, there's a lot of wisdom from that. And they have a unique ability to spot bubbles in the market, artificial hype, and they have a really uncanny ability to detect very quickly.
Call the BS quickly. Yes.
I was going to go there, but yeah, you said it.
That's a 2-letter word. So now we've talked quite a bit about APIs. I hear that you're working on a new book on the concept of APIs. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. This will actually be my third. My first book, all 3 are with O'Reilly, was E-commerce in the Cloud. So that was how you take legacy commerce applications and retrofit them to deploy into a public cloud. The second was microservices for modern commerce. So how do you build these small vertical teams that are exposing functionality? So more below the API level. And this third and hopefully final, if I have my, hopefully final is...
Don't say that.
Yeah, I know, right?
We want more. Yeah.
Is how you model the APIs and then how you consume the APIs.
Okay.
Right, so whatever's below, we don't really care, but now we're saying model the APIs first. Here's how you model them correctly. Here's what a good API looks like. Here's how you call the API. Right, is very much focused on that part of the commerce space, and that's coming out next month, actually. So
okay, cool.
Looking good.
Fantastic.
Just in the final editing process, so I'll be doing that on my flight home.
Great. So one other question I have is that jobs. What kind of jobs are going to be available in this new serverless software world? What are the hot jobs that people can start thinking about right now?
I think there's a lot of interesting integration work and architecture work that is that you need to glue together all of these different things, because serverless is great for individual discrete transactions. All right, and let me give you an example. I uploaded an image to my S3 bucket in Amazon, right? And now I want to resize that image, and we'll resize it 5 different times. Or, the customer's credit card has been declined, right? Those are very individual, discrete actions. But where there's a lot of opportunity is in merging all of those things together into workflows, right? So if a credit card transaction fails, right, and you've got that message coming in, now I want to go into a workflow, right? Is this customer a loyalty member? Yes, then let's trigger a message to go out and call them. Is the customer, a known scammer, right? And we'll cross-reference the database on that. Right? In that case, perform this action. So, and then, it kind of acts like a tree, like a branching tree. And I know part of the value of serverless is to avoid the tight coupling that we've seen in monolithic applications. But there does need to be a layer above that, which is the decision tree of how these how these events are handled within a system, and how complex business transactions are carried out. And I think that, coupled with integration work, so how you integrate these systems with legacy, because as much as we don't like it, legacy will be with us for a very long time. I think that's a really interesting space.
So as far as like specific software languages that people could learn?
JavaScript is really big these days.
Okay.
That's big. And what's nice about JavaScript is you can write it for front-end code and for back-end code. And internally, we have vertical teams. And it's actually really nice. We have one team that's all JavaScript. And it's phenomenal because we just hire a group of people and they can do front-end or back-end, and they can go back and forth when they get sick of one or the other.
Right.
Where if you have traditional Java or Scala or something like that, they just do back-end code forever. But Java's good too. We see a lot of Java needs out there. I think that's very important.
What about specific application like, let's say AWS experts or Google Cloud experts or Azure expertise? Are those going to be in demand?
Yeah, any one of those three is in very hot demand. And remember, cloud isn't just a matter of going and provisioning a virtual machine anymore, right? It's an actual operating system where you now have all the foundational elements. You have a PaaS, you have serverless, you have networking, you have security. There are 1,000 things, and if you build an application the correct way, you're using most of those services. Because again, the model in today's world is, I don't want to protect myself from vendor lock-in forever, because there's a big cost in doing that. Instead, I'm going to deploy this application to meet this business need for the next 18 months. Lock and be damned, I'll rewrite the application when my business needs change again in 18 months from then, right? So it's people who can bring all of those pieces together And instead of, for example, deploying Kafka to a public cloud, saying, well, here's Kinesis, why don't we just use Kinesis, right? And now you wire Kinesis into your applications from AWS, right?
So people that are really like API experts would also be...
API experts is very important. Microservices, all the glue that holds these things together, and that includes service discovery, it includes all the advanced networking. There's a lot of glue that's required, and what it does is it dramatically simplifies the lives of individual software developers. So if you can do all that, if you can kind of be in the middle of that, you're fine. We'll always need traditional developers, but the sphere of what they care about is decreasing quite a bit. It used to be you needed these really expensive developers to go in and work on a 5 million line code base.
Right.
Right. And think of them almost as like surgeons, right? They're brain surgeons. They go in exactly, but they have brain surgeon salaries, right? And now we're getting to a model in an API world where the complexity of each individual unit is a lot less. So there might be a 5-person inventory team, but their API is, you know, it's not big, right? It's one API, it has 5 different inputs, and it gives you 10 different outputs, right? So the scope of complexity is a lot less, and that allows you to go out and hire more generalist developers. So I think what we're going to see is at the very top end of the market, those folks, people who can do real microservices architecture, people who can really build these new cloud native applications from scratch, at the very top end of the market, they'll do really, really well.
Okay.
Right, and those salaries will increase pretty substantially. But I think the generalist developer who today might work on a 2 million line code base, I think those folks are going to be, I don't know if, they'll probably stagnate. I don't think they're going to go down. But the amount of work that each individual developer has to do is going to be less, and it will be easier to swap in and out of those developers.
Right. They're going to be more in demand, definitely. The newer software.
The barrier to entry is a lot lower, because now instead of working on this huge code base that, you know, one small change could break the whole thing, you're now working on a team with 6 other people, and it's a very collaborative environment. You might have 3,000 lines of code to deal with, right? It's a very, very different world than you're used to. So it lowers the barrier to entry. A lot more people will get into the market. So at the very top end, everything great if you're one of those folks. But you know, if you're a mid-level developer, I think you really have to get those skills, or you're going to be in for some wage stagnation.
And that's also one of the reasons that retailers also should be thinking about using other, like, specialist applications like ISVs, like, you know, commercetools or any other company, because again, the competition for really good developers is going to be tough, and it's just going to get tougher and tougher.
Right.
So instead of, let's say, if you can afford 2 or 3 really good developers, you don't want them to work on things that can be done by somebody else easily. You want them to work on the really unique things that you can own yourself. And
what's cool about today's world is you can give a good developer, right, you know, a good 10-year seasoned developer, right, who knows what they're doing, you can give that person a credit card and say, you know, go to AWS, go crazy. And by the end of the day, right, like by the end of a single day, they could have wired 20 different AWS services, spent $10 on the credit card, and have an MVP, something that they can demonstrate the next morning. Because it's not, you're not writing code. You're not writing a web server anymore, right? You're not doing any of that. You can just simply log into Lambda, deploy a function, connect it, right? It's wiring today. It's like a toy store. It is. A toy store for developers. It's really amazing. So the productivity, you know, we've heard historically, right, there's the 10x developer. Right. If you have the right skills, the full stack developer, the 10x, you could be a 100x developer today. Right? And that's what cloud enables, because you have all these building blocks, not from cloud, but not only from cloud, but from vendors like us. Right? You can get going very, very quickly on it. And you can have most of the APIs you need for commerce right there. You have all the public cloud APIs, right? Everything is now available for you to consume. Is there like an API marketplace somewhere? There are a couple of them. There are. But they haven't really taken off yet. And that's largely because software is still sold directly to enterprises. It's not, We're not yet, but I think we'll get to a point where you go to a website and you type in, I want a pricing engine, and you'll see 10 different pricing engine competitors come up. We're not quite there, but we're getting to that point where you'll see that.
I like to see a website that I go and I say, I'm a retailer, I want to do this, and they give me a full stack of everything that you're going to need, and maybe a couple of options.
Yep.
That would be awesome. I mean, that's really what retailers need so they can focus on their work.
Yeah. And we'll get to that. We'll get to that. But, we at commercetools,
You mean commercetools will get to that?
No, we are already at that. We have that already. But what we discovered, and we kind of pivoted a little bit, is developers are, by and large, not making those decisions.
Yeah.
And it's still, at least in the commerce space, it's still marketing, and it's more senior executives. And those are not the folks who are going to go to a website, pull out a credit card, and buy. So we're very much, we do support the self-service model, and we do have customers who find us and then sign up, which is great. But a lot of it is working with them on organizational transformation, change, it's road mapping, it's, there's a lot of work that's involved. You're not just buying a commodity. It's just like when you buy a product, right? When you go buy a handbag, right, from a luxury store, you're not just buying some leather and some straps, right? You're buying an experience. And it's the same thing when our customers come to us. They're not just getting an API, they're getting our organizational know-how, right? Here's how you approach IT digital transformation. Here's what some of your peers are doing in the industry. Here are some best practices. Here are some workshops.
Right.
So there's more value than just buying. And I think that's in part why we haven't seen a pure API marketplace crop up yet.
Okay. So one final question. Does commercetools actually use third-party services also to offer to customers, like APIs or services from third parties that you haven't developed yourself?
We have one, and it's for product recommendations.
Okay.
And there's a company out there, Bavil, they do a great job. It's a great price for the product, and we didn't want to go out and hire a team to do.
Right.
And it's similar to how our customers should approach this as well. Product recommendations are expected, they're commoditized. There are 100 different offerings, and we said, let's pick one, integrate it. That now becomes our product.
Right.
Because we're not going to differentiate ourselves in the market by building that ourselves.
Right.
And that's, again, how I argue that our customers should approach it as well. Look at what makes sense for your business.
You have another one that's in the works as well.
Visional, yes. Visional as well, yes. We are offering Visional, which is video-based selling, co-selling, things like that. That's important. And we have pilots with a lot of others as well that we're working on. But we really are looking to add pieces to our platform, and we'd like to be, and we already are, but we'd like to be even more of a one-stop shop than we are today.
Right.
But we're always playing with new technology, and
you have to. Yeah, you can't build everything yourself, so it's good to be open.
No.
To bring in other people. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kelly. This was very fascinating talking with you. Look forward to seeing your book. And with that, we'll end it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.